This is a pretty cool project behind me. It's a 1969 Camaro that came to our shop basically as a finished car. It looked just like it does right now, and it had a full restoration done by a different shop. And the car changed owners, and the new owner wanted to upgrade a whole bunch of things on the car without disturbing the way the car looked on the outside. So it posed a whole new set of challenges to be able to pull this off, especially because the upgrades were going to be pretty substantial. Under the hood of this car is a fuel-injected 540 cubic inch Shafiroff big block Chevy V8 engine, making over 700 horsepower. And when the car came to us, it was still riding on a largely stock suspension system, which meant it had, new shocks and bushings and springs, but it was still the original 69 Camaro front subframe and a leaf spring rear axle with the biggest tire you could fit on a stock 69 Camaro rear end and stock wheel tub. Well, that was really no match for the 700 horsepower big block Chevy. So our customer wanted us to do some suspension upgrades and also put bigger wheels and tires on it so that when he put his foot down, this thing actually went forward instead of sitting still and going up in tire smoke. So it came to our shop, and the first thing we did was kind of evaluate the plan and pick some parts that we thought would help him achieve his goal. And we chose to run a full Detroit Speed suspension system, front and rear, which meant we were going to remove the whole stock front subframe and cut out the rear suspension, add a bigger wheel tub, and install a Detroit Speed Quadra 4-link rear suspension system. And you note I've used the word cut many times because when you do that rear suspension system on a car like this, you have to cut out the original wheel tubs, you have to cut the rear trunk floor, you have to cut some mounts underneath the rear seat in order to fit the suspension components. And the trick to doing this on this car was to make all those cuts without hurting the very expensive and nice shiny paint on the outside. So how do you go about doing something like that? And the answer is very carefully. You have to protect everything. The first thing we did was disassemble a big part of the car. This car has a very nice custom red baseball glove stitch leather interior, and all of that had to come out so that we could break out the cutting wheels and the welding torches without setting everything on fire. So out came the interior, and then on the outside of the car, we completely wrapped it with some spark paper. It's a paper that's designed to protect surfaces from flying sparks and burns. It's not fireproof, so you still have to be careful, but it goes a long way to keep this car protected from getting scratched and burned and beat up during this process. And then once we had everything apart, we sent it back to the fabrication shop where Adam began his task of drilling out spot welds and cutting out the original wheel tubs and beginning the process to narrow the frame rails. When you do a Detroit Speed Quadra-link rear suspension, the Quadra-link means there's 4 individual links that now locate that rear axle squarely under the car, and they allow for far more articulation than the leaf spring design. The leaf spring was designed to keep the rear end under the car, but it really kind of only moved up and down, and under high horsepower applications, the leaf springs can ramp up, which cause tire shake and a loss of traction. That 4-link is far more precise and not only keeps that rear axle centered under the car, but it allows it to twist and articulate. So if you're going to use the car on a road course or on an autocross, the rear tires are now planted far more firmly than they would be with that leaf spring suspension. So it's definitely a worthwhile upgrade, especially in a high power car like this. Part of that process was also to install a new rear axle assembly that we got from Curry Enterprises. We changed the rear gear ratio and added one of their 9+ differentials so that we now have a nice, strong center section, and that 9+ is essentially a Ford 9-inch design, which has the luxury of having all kinds of gear ratios available, so you can basically pick whatever you want. This car does have a 6-speed manual transmission, so it has a double overdrive, so we didn't necessarily need a gear that was highway friendly in the back because the transmission handled that inside the car. So once we got everything cut out of the back, we found that there was some areas that needed some attention, a few rust holes and some things that weren't addressed when the car was restored the first time. And that's pretty common. You'll find that every restorer and every customer has a preference about what they are more concerned with when having their car restored. And in this case, it was pretty obvious that all the resources went to the fit and finish of the outside of the car and that custom interior and getting that big block and the 6-speed in the car, and a little bit less attention was focused under the car. So the current customer wanted us to take care of those details, and part of that Quadra process involves cutting and narrowing the rear frame rails to accommodate the bigger wheel well and the bigger rear wheel and tire. So a lot of that stuff had to come out anyway. It was a nice opportunity to fix some of those rusty areas, including a few more spots we found in the trunk floor. So this car, it's another one where what we call might as well syndrome starts to creep in. Once you start stripping the paint and peeling away the layers, you start to find things that you might as well fix while you're in there. And it seems like many cars have that problem because it's just an opportune time to fix things when they're all apart. So we tried to keep the scope under control and not let the might as well syndrome creep too far. But the customer was cool about it, and he was a driving force behind making some of these changes and improvements. So at the end, we're confident that he got a much better car than he anticipated because we took care of those details. Once the back half of the car was welded up and ready to rock, we focused our attention on the front suspension. And in this case, we purchased a Detroit Speed hydroformed front subframe, which came fully assembled and powder-coated black. So that was a nice feature that they offer so that we didn't have to take the time to disassemble it and paint it and put it all back together. It was ready to go basically right off the crate. And doing a subframe swap on a high-end car like this can be a little bit challenging and a little stressful because all the front sheet metal had already been fitted on this car. The door gaps were nice, the hood gap was nice, everything fit really well, and we didn't want to disturb that. So a lot of times we would just start by removing all the front sheet metal and then unbolting everything and unbolting the subframe and switching them out. But in this case, we did a risk assessment and determined that we could leave all that sheet metal together and carefully lower the subframe out of the car and raise the new one in place. So basically you're doing an engine swap out the bottom. Way to disconnect the radiator, drain all the fluids, disconnect all the electrical stuff, and then unbolt that subframe, lower it down, take our new subframe and transfer the engine and the other pieces to it to prepare it for install. Again, another area of might as well syndrome. We had the engine out and it did have a few leaks in it, so we might as well re-gasket the engine. So we took some time to reseal the rear main seal, the oil pan, valve covers, fix a couple leaks here and there. And part of this task was also to change the fuel injection system on the car. It came in with a system that the customer wasn't happy with, so we installed a Holley Dominator system that kind of went in place. It's still a throttle body style fuel injection, but this version offers a little more tunability, a little more drivability, and more flexibility than the previous system. So we took some time to install those pieces on the engine and then brought the whole subframe up underneath the car and reattached everything. And luckily our team was able to pull that off without disturbing the fitment of the sheet metal and have any issues that way. So once we had the front subframe in, we could focus our attention on upgrading the brakes and the wheels and tires. This car now has a set of huge brakes all the way around and a very stylish forge line wheel. These are an 18 and a 19-inch size, gray face, brush hooped, and a far wider footprint than the wheels and tires that it came in with. And the car now rolls on a set of Toyo R888 tires, which are an R compound tire, basically a competition tire for the street. These tires are not marketed to have the longest tread life, but they are marketed to have a high level of stick. So these wheels and tires will allow the customer to take full advantage of his trick new front and rear suspension. And other benefits of that Detroit Speed front subframe include a hydroform design, which means the rails are of a stiffness, not only because of the strength of the steel, but because of the shape of the tubes. They actually push a hydraulic fluid through the tube and expand it to mold it into the shape that you find. It's current OE level technology that Detroit Speed was able to put in a retrofit part for an old Camaro. It's pretty cool. And when they did that, they also revised the whole front suspension geometry so that it's designed to go around turns, and it's also designed to be stable at high speed, and it's also comfortable enough to drive around and enjoy when you're not on the track. It incorporates a rack and pinion steering unit, an adjustable coilover shock, so it's real high technology stuff that's designed to fit in the nose of a stock 69 Camaro. It's pretty cool. So once we got all the major pieces put back together, we refired the engine, had to spend a little bit of time doing a base calibration for the Holley fuel injection, and this is a self-adjusting fuel injection system. You have to answer a few questions in the beginning about the setup, about the size of the engine, a few basic parameters, but then once you start the car and get it up to operating temperature, it adjusts its own air-fuel ratio so that the tune is friendly to drive and still makes a lot of power. These systems can save you tons of time in a dyno cell manually keying in and adjusting air-fuel curves, because it kind of handles all that on its own. It's pretty cool. So now that the project is finished, I think our crew did a heck of a job of achieving the goals of the customer. This car still makes all the power, has far better drivability thanks to the fuel injection system, and now he can actually use that power because of the bigger tires in the back with increased traction, the better rear suspension, and the revised front suspension makes this car handle far better than it ever did with the stock 69 Camaro suspension. And although it posed challenges to be able to do all of this heavy mechanical work on a freshly painted car, our team was able to pull it off. And we've done stuff like this in the past where, you know, people think a car is finished and then want to change something afterwards, and they call us because they know we can do this kind of work without having to go backwards and you know, mess up the car. So if you have a car that's gone through the restoration process and still isn't what you wanted, you don't have to lose hope. You can contact us at our website at v8speedshop.com. We've got a form there you can fill out, tell us the story about what the car is doing and what you'd like it to do. And I'm pretty confident that our team can probably help you out. If we can pull something like this off, maybe we can do the same for your car.